There are moments in the vast tapestry of existence when peace feels almost too quiet, when the world exhales after so much suffering that even the wind seems afraid to disturb it. This was one of those moments. In the Hidden Leaf Village, the sun rose slowly over rooftops that had been rebuilt stone by stone, brick by brick, memory by memory. The Fourth Great Ninja War was over. The scars remained, but so did the hope. Children ran through the streets laughing without fear, ramen stands filled the morning air with warmth, and above it all stood Naruto Uzumaki, a young man who had become something greater than a hero. He had become a symbol, a living reminder that even the loneliest boy could carry an entire world on his back and still smile. The five great nations, once locked in centuries of blood and betrayal, now shared borders instead of battlefields. Shinobi trained side by side with those they once called enemies. The word peace, so foreign to their tongues for generations, had finally found a home. And yet somewhere deep within Naruto's chest, an unfamiliar stillness lingered. Not fear, not sorrow, something quieter, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Far beyond the reach of any shinobi eye, in a realm shaped by different laws and different legends, another world enjoyed its own fragile calm. On Earth, in Universe 7, the sky was blue and endless. Goku sat on a grassy hill, a fishing rod balanced lazily in his hands, unaware that anything unusual was about to occur. Vegeta trained in silence beneath a waterfall, his fists carving the air with the discipline of a prince who had long since stopped fighting for pride, and now fought only for those he loved. Piccolo meditated beneath the stars that had not yet faded from the morning sky. Gohan read quietly beside his daughter. Bulma tinkered with a device that hummed with soft blue light. After gods, tyrants, and universe-ending threats, this rare stillness felt earned. It felt deserved. It felt permanent. It was not. Without warning, without prophecy, without a single tremor to announce its arrival, space itself began to fracture. A single crack appeared in the sky above the hidden leaf, silent and thin, like a hairline scratch across glass. Then another. Then 100 more. The clouds split apart as though pulled by invisible hands, and reality began to tear. Somewhere in Universe 7, Goku suddenly lifted his head, his fishing rod falling forgotten into the river. He felt it before he saw it. A wrongness. A presence that did not belong. And then the sky opened. Entire mountain ranges vanished in an instant, replaced by unfamiliar continents that had never existed on any map. Hidden villages awakened to find themselves surrounded by strange forests, alien skies, and stars arranged in patterns no astronomer had ever recorded. Oceans shifted, rivers reversed. The very constellations seemed to have been rewritten by an unseen hand. In the leaf, Naruto stood atop the Hokage monument, his cloak whipping in a wind that carried scents from a world that was not his own. In Universe 7, Bulma's instruments screamed with readings that made no mathematical sense. Needles spinning wildly, screens flashing warnings in languages the machine itself had never been programmed to speak. Both worlds reacted the same way, with suspicion, with fear. With the ancient assumption that when the impossible occurs, someone must be to blame. Naruto immediately dispatched his most trusted shinobi to investigate the unfamiliar territories that had appeared overnight. Sasuke, Kakashi, and Sakura moved out at once, silent shadows across a landscape that no longer obeyed the maps they had memorized. On the other side of the fracture, Goku, Vegeta, Piccolo, Gohan, and Bulma gathered around the anomaly, studying it with expressions ranging from cautious curiosity to open hostility. Vegeta's fists were already clenched. Piccolo's eyes narrowed. Goku, for once, did not smile. Neither world understood what had truly happened. Neither world realized that the merging of their realities had not been an act of war, nor an accident, nor the work of any god they knew. Something older, something patient. Something that had waited between universes for longer than either civilization could comprehend had finally been given a reason to stir. The first encounters between shinobi and Z-fighters would not begin with fists. They would begin with silence, with drawn weapons and cautious steps, with two people staring at each other across a boundary that should never have existed, each wondering if the other was the cause of everything falling apart. But misunderstanding, as always, would only be the beginning. The forest was unfamiliar to both parties. Its trees rose taller than any oak the shinobi had ever climbed, and yet its soil carried the faint scent of pine that the Z-fighters recognized from their own world. It was as if two landscapes had been stitched together by an artist who did not care whether the seams matched. Somewhere in that stitched wilderness, the two groups finally met. Naruto stepped through a curtain of hanging vines, his eyes scanning the clearing with the practiced calm of a leader who had seen too many battles begin with a single misstep. Behind him, Sasuke moved like a shadow, one hand resting near his blade. Kakashi and Sakura followed, alert but composed. On the other side of the clearing, a small group waited. Goku stood at the front, hands relaxed at his sides, his expression open and curious. Piccolo loomed behind him, arms folded, cape motionless despite the wind. Gohan stood ready, gentle but alert. Krillin offered a nervous smile. Vegeta, arms crossed, did not smile at all. For a long moment, neither side spoke. They simply looked at one another, measuring, weighing, feeling. And what each side felt was something they could not name. The shinobi searched for chakra signatures and found nothing familiar. There was power here, immense power, but it did not flow through the veins of the world the way chakra did. It did not rise from the earth or descend from the heavens. It came from within, pure and untethered, a kind of energy that seemed to defy every rule they had been taught. The Z-fighters felt the same confusion in reverse. Piccolo, whose senses had always been sharper than most, narrowed his eyes as he tried to lock onto Naruto's power level and found only fragments. There were signatures, yes, but they layered upon one another in strange spiraling patterns, weaving in and out of the body like living rivers. It was not Kai. It was something else entirely. Goku, ever the first to break silence with sincerity rather than suspicion, raised a hand in greeting. He asked them who they were, where they had come from, and whether they too had felt the sky tear open. Naruto answered honestly. He explained the hidden leaf, the war they had survived, the peace they had barely begun to enjoy. Goku listened with that rare attentiveness that made every speaker feel important. When Naruto finished, Goku grinned and asked if they were strong. That single question changed the mood entirely. Sasuke's eyes flickered with interest. Vegeta uncrossed his arms. Sakura exchanged a glance with Kakashi. And Naruto, unable to resist a challenge, laughed and said he would show them. What followed was not a battle. It was a conversation written in power. Naruto raised his hands, and the clearing filled with 1,000 identical copies of himself, each one grinning, each one waving, each one perfectly solid. The Z-fighters stared in astonishment. Krillin whispered that it was impossible. Gohan asked how many there truly were. Even Piccolo's stoic face betrayed a flicker of amazement. Then Goku stepped forward, and with a simple exhale, his hair burst into gold. The air around him crackled. The grass at his feet bent outward. His eyes glowed with a light that seemed to come from the core of a star. Sakura took a step back. Kakashi's visible eye widened. Sasuke, however, did not flinch. His Rinnegan spun slowly, drinking in every detail of the transformation, cataloging it, understanding it, respecting it. Piccolo, sensing something extraordinary in Sasuke, approached him quietly and asked about his eyes. Sasuke, usually reserved, answered with unexpected patience. He spoke of the Sharingan, of the Rinnegan, of the burden of seeing too much. Piccolo listened the way only a former villain turned mentor could listen, with understanding. Vegeta, meanwhile, remained skeptical. He watched the shinobi with the guarded suspicion of a prince who had learned the hard way that flashy techniques often hid fragile hearts. He muttered that clones and illusions were tricks, not strength. Yet even he could not deny that these strangers carried themselves with the weight of true warriors. Diplomacy prevailed that day. Words were exchanged. Names were remembered. A fragile trust began to form between two groups who had every reason to distrust one another. But beneath the surface, questions lingered in every mind. Who was truly stronger? Whose path was truly superior? Whose world would endure if the fracture worsened? And far above them, hidden within the seams of the fractured sky, something watched. It had no eyes, yet it saw everything. It had no heart, yet it hungered. It observed the shinobi and the Z-fighters with growing interest, recognizing in their meeting the fulfillment of a condition it had waited eons to witness. The feast was almost ready to begin. Morning arrived softly over the merged wilderness, painting the strange sky in colors that belonged to neither world in particular. Birds that no one could identify sang from branches that seemed impossibly tall, and the air itself carried a faint hum, as if reality was still adjusting to the presence of two universes pressed against each other. It was in this quiet, uncertain dawn that Goku made a proposal no one had expected. He suggested they train together, not to prove who was stronger, not to settle the unspoken question that had lingered since their first meeting, but to learn, to understand, to exchange the wisdom that only warriors from entirely different worlds could offer one another. Naruto agreed almost immediately, his eyes lighting up with the kind of enthusiasm that had once carried him from outcast to hero. Sasuke, more reserved, gave only a small nod, but his silence was its own form of agreement. Kakashi smiled behind his mask. Sakura began preparing medical supplies, always the practical one. And so, in a clearing that bridged two realities, the training began. Naruto struggled first. Kai, he discovered, was nothing like chakra. Chakra flowed from the union of physical and spiritual energy, disciplined through hand signs, shaped through years of study. Kai, however, was something rawer. It emerged from will alone, from the fire of the spirit unbound by ritual. When Goku tried to guide him through the process of gathering Kai, Naruto sat cross-legged for hours, brow furrowed, muscles tense, until finally a faint glow flickered at his fingertips. It was small, it was clumsy, but it was there. And when it appeared, Naruto laughed with the delight of a child who had just discovered fire. Goku, in turn, tried his hand at chakra meditation under Kakashi's patient instruction. He was surprised to find that gathering chakra required a stillness he was not accustomed to. Kai responded to intensity, to emotion, to the roar of the spirit. Chakra required balance, quiet, the careful alignment of body and mind. Goku, for all his instincts, found himself humbled by the discipline. Yet he approached it with the same joy he approached everything, treating each failure as a step closer to understanding. Piccolo, ever the analyst, became fascinated by sage energy. He watched Naruto sit motionless in meditation, drawing in the natural energy of the world around him, and he recognized something familiar within it. Something ancient. Something that resonated with the Namekian traditions of his own people. He spent hours observing, asking questions, testing techniques of his own that mirrored what he saw. Naruto, sensing a kindred spirit in the tall green warrior, welcomed the exchange without hesitation. Sasuke turned his attention to instant transmission. The technique fascinated him not for its speed but for its precision. To move across vast distances by locking onto a specific energy signature required an awareness that even his Rinnegan could barely match. Goku tried to explain it, but the explanation itself was frustratingly simple. You just feel where you want to go. Sasuke, whose entire life had been shaped by the complexity of his lineage, found himself both irritated and intrigued by such a straightforward answer. Yet slowly, painfully, he began to understand. Vegeta remained apart from the exchange at first. He watched from a nearby cliff, arms folded, expression carved from stone. To him, the shinobi seemed to rely too heavily on techniques, on tools, on tricks. A true warrior, he believed, forged strength from within. And yet, as the days passed, even he could not ignore what he saw. He watched Rock Lee arrive from the Leaf, a young man without chakra reserves worth mentioning, without special eyes or bloodline gifts. And he watched Lee train with such relentless dedication that his fists bled and his bones ached, and still he did not stop. Vegeta, prince of a warrior race that valued raw discipline above all else, felt something shift inside him. He said nothing, but he began to watch Lee more carefully. The shinobi, for their part, were discovering that the Dragon Ball warriors possessed a form of discipline unlike anything they had ever witnessed. It was not the discipline of secrecy or strategy. It was the discipline of pure devotion to strength. These warriors did not train for missions. They did not train for villages. They trained because the act of growing stronger was, in itself, a way of honoring life. And that philosophy, so foreign to the shinobi's mission-driven world, planted seeds of thought that would blossom in ways none of them could yet imagine. Slowly, admiration began to replace suspicion. Krillin and Sakura bonded over their shared roles as the underestimated ones who nonetheless stood beside legends. Gohan and Kakashi spoke often about the weight of being teachers to unpredictable students. Goku and Naruto, of course, became inseparable, two suns orbiting each other, each one convinced the other was the most fascinating person they had ever met. But even as friendships formed, the world around them whispered warnings. Every use of chakra sent tremors through the merged reality. Every burst of Kai widened the cracks in the sky. The dimensional fracture, once a distant curiosity, was beginning to grow. And somewhere far above, something ancient stirred more fully, drawn by the rising harmony of two energies that were never meant to touch. The feast was preparing itself. There are things in the universe that do not belong to any pantheon, any prophecy, any legend recorded by mortal hands. They exist in the spaces between spaces, in the silences between heartbeats of reality, in the quiet dark, where even gods rarely look. They do not seek. They wait. And when the conditions are right, they wake. The merging of chakra and Kai had done what no war, no god, no cosmic tyrant had ever accomplished. It had rung a bell that could be heard in the deepest hollows of the multiverse. Two energy systems, each pure in its own way, had begun to blend along the fractured seams of reality. Their harmony was beautiful. Their harmony was fatal. Because harmony, when it echoes across dimensions, becomes a beacon. And something had been listening for that beacon for longer than either universe had existed. It began with silence. A silence so complete that even the wind seemed to forget how to move. Naruto felt it first, mid-training, his Kai flame flickering out as a cold that had nothing to do with temperature crept into his bones. Goku felt it next, his laughter dying in his throat as his instincts screamed at him to look up. Piccolo. His eyes, wide and unblinking, were fixed on a point in the sky where the fracture had begun to darken, to deepen, to pulse. And then it emerged. It was not a creature in any way that language could describe. It had no true shape, no consistent form. It shifted as the eye tried to hold it, folding in on itself, unfolding again, existing in more dimensions than any mortal mind could process. Its presence pressed down on the world like an ocean pressing on the seafloor. The grass beneath its shadow withered. The river slowed. The very air felt thin, as though the entity's mere existence was drinking the breath out of reality itself. It had no name that any language could pronounce, but those who felt it would come to call it the Devourer. It fed on unstable realities. It had been born, if such a thing could be said to be born, in the ashes of universes that had collapsed under the weight of their own contradictions. Chakra alone could not have awakened it. Kai alone could not have summoned it. But together, mingling along the raw wounds of merged space, they had created the perfect meal. A dish it had waited eons to taste. The consumption began quietly. A mountain range vanished without sound, its stones simply ceasing to exist. A forest folded into itself and disappeared, leaving behind a smooth expanse of nothing. An entire village, thankfully already evacuated, was there one moment and gone the next, not destroyed, not burned, simply removed from the equation of reality. Whole dimensions began to collapse inward like paper crumpled by an invisible hand. Even the gods took notice. Far above, in a realm untouched by mortal eyes, Beerus opened his eyes from a nap that should have lasted another century. He sat up slowly, ears twitching, tail flicking, his golden gaze narrowing at a sensation he had not felt in all his years as a god of destruction. Wise appeared beside him without a word, staff in hand, expression uncharacteristically grave. Together they observed the fracture from beyond space, and for the first time in Beerus's long memory, the god of destruction felt something dangerously close to concern. He whispered that this was not natural, that this was not something a god had made, that this was something older than gods. Below, in the merged wilderness, Naruto and Goku stood side by side, staring up at the impossible shape that dominated the sky. Neither of them spoke at first. Naruto's fists were clenched so tightly that his knuckles had gone white. Goku's expression, usually so open, was carved into something harder, something ancient, something almost sorrowful. They both understood, without needing words, that this was beyond them individually. Not because they were weak, but because the enemy did not play by any rule either of them recognized. Vegeta arrived first, landing beside them, his eyes locked on the entity. He did not speak of pride. He did not speak of Saiyan superiority. He simply said that whatever this thing was, it needed to die. Sasuke landed next, Rinnegan spinning slowly, analyzing dimensions that even his eye struggled to comprehend. Piccolo, Gohan, Kakashi, Sakura, Krillin, and Rock Lee gathered one by one, until the clearing held warriors from two universes standing shoulder to shoulder. Naruto turned to Goku. Goku turned to Naruto. And in that quiet moment, an understanding passed between them that no translator could have captured. They were not two heroes from two worlds anymore. They were the joint fist of everything that still had the will to fight. For the first time in the history of either universe, Shinobi and Z fighters would prepare not to test each other, but to bleed beside each other. Not as strangers, not as rivals, but as allies. The Devourer descended lower. The world held its breath, and the greatest alliance ever forged was about to be born. The gathering felt sacred, though no one dared to call it that aloud. There was no ceremony, no banner raised, no oath spoken by candlelight. Yet as the warriors assembled on the ridge overlooking the fractured horizon, something in the air understood what was happening. Legends, real legends, the kind that would be whispered about long after the last star burned out, were choosing to stand together. Naruto stood at the center, his cloak flowing behind him, his blue eyes hard with resolve. Beside him, Sasuke's silhouette was as sharp as a drawn blade, his rinnegan glowing faintly against the dimming light. Kakashi arrived next, calm as always, one hand resting on the pommel of a kunai that had seen more wars than most weapons ever would. Gaara descended from the sky on a bed of shifting sand, his gourd hovering behind him like a loyal companion. Rock Lee arrived last of the shinobi, his fists already bandaged, his eyes burning with a fire that needed no chakra to shine. On the other side of the ridge, the Z fighters gathered with equal gravity. Goku's aura shimmered faintly, restrained but ready. Vegeta's cape snapped in the wind, his arms folded, his gaze fixed on the horizon with the cold focus of a warrior who had already decided the outcome. Gohan flexed his hands, his father's confidence and his mother's intelligence balanced in equal measure. Piccolo stood taller than any of them, his cape motionless, his eyes reading the sky like an ancient scripture. Android 17 appeared without ceremony, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. But his presence carried the quiet weight of someone who had already saved a universe once and was prepared to do it again. 10 warriors, 2 universes, 1 impossible enemy. Naruto stepped forward and did what he had always done best. He spoke. He did not speak of strategy. He did not speak of chakra or chai. He spoke of home. He spoke of the faces of the people who waited for them, the villages that slept beneath skies that had not yet been consumed, the children who did not yet know their world was in danger. He spoke of Iruka, of Hinata, of every ramen bowl he still owed Tucci. He spoke of the promise he had made to himself long ago that no one would ever be forgotten as long as he still stood. Goku listened. And when Naruto finished, Goku smiled, and that smile alone was worth an army. He said only one thing. He said they would win, not because they were strong, but because they were together. The first assault came quickly. The Devourer's tendrils, if such things could be called tendrils, lashed out across the sky, each one capable of erasing a mountain with a single touch. The Alliance moved as one. Naruto's clones filled the battlefield, each one a distraction, a wall, a weapon. Goku's instant transmission carried him from one crisis to another, striking the entity's fragments with blows that cracked the sound barrier. Sasuke and Piccolo unexpectedly found themselves fighting back to back, their movements syncing with an ease that startled them both. Sasuke's Amaterasu ignited the Devourer's tendrils in black flames that refused to die, while Piccolo's special beam cannon pierced through the burning darkness with surgical precision. Vegeta's admiration, long suppressed, began to surface. He watched Rock Lee open his gates, one after another, until Lea's body burned with a green aura brighter than any Super Saiyan glow. Leah moved faster than the Devourer's tendrils could react, striking with fists that shattered dimensions. Vegeta, Prince of the Saiyans, muttered a single word beneath his breath. From him it was worth more than 1,000 speeches. Gaara's sand became a shield for the entire alliance, catching debris, deflecting attacks, cradling the wounded. Kakashi's sharing in copied Kai movements he had never seen before, adapting in real time, weaving techniques from both universes into strikes no one else could replicate. Sakura's fists cracked the ground beneath the Devourer's fragments, her healing hands moving between allies with the speed of a battlefield saint. Gohan unleashed the ultimate form his father had never fully mastered, his aura shining like the last light of a dying star. Android 17, quiet and efficient, moved through the battlefield with barriers that saved lives without fanfare. He shielded Sakura from a strike that would have ended her. She looked up at him breathless and thanked him with her eyes. He simply nodded and kept fighting. And Naruto and Goku, at the center of it all, began to understand something that neither of them had ever fully grasped before. Strength was not measured in transformations. It was not measured in chakra reserves or power levels. It was measured in the trust one warrior placed in another. It was measured in the willingness to leave your back exposed because you knew, without doubt, that someone stood behind you. The devourer roared, if such a thing could roar, in a language older than language itself. But for the first time since it had awakened, its endless hunger felt something new. Resistance. Real resistance. And in the growing bond between shinobi and Z fighters, a weapon was forming that no cosmic predator had ever encountered before. Not chakra, not Kai, but unity. The battlefield was no longer a battlefield. It had become a wound in the fabric of existence itself, a place where the laws of physics faltered and the definitions of up and down, past and future, life and death began to lose meaning. Stars in the distance flickered like dying candles. Entire constellations blinked out one by one. Reality was being eaten, and the Alliance stood at its final edge, refusing to let it fall. The devourer emerged fully now. It no longer hid within the fracture. It no longer wore the shape of tendrils or shadows. It unfurled across the sky like a cathedral built from the bones of dead universes, endless in every direction, its form shifting between geometry that mortal minds could not hold. To look at it directly was to feel your own soul flinch. And yet the warriors below did not look away. They could not afford to. High above, at the very edge of comprehension, Beerus and Wise appeared. They did not descend to the battlefield. Wise explained calmly that this was not their fight. The devourer existed in a space between the responsibilities of gods. To interfere directly would upset balances even more ancient than themselves. But they could hold the walls of existence together while the mortals fought. They could keep the universes from collapsing entirely long enough for the impossible to become possible. Beerus, arms folded, his cat-like eyes narrowed, gave a single nod. He said only one thing: "Do not disappoint me." Below, Naruto and Goku became the emotional center of the storm. They fought not for pride, not for victory, not for the thrill that had once driven them in simpler days. They fought for every face they had ever known, for every friend who had believed in them, for every stranger who had never learned their names but whose lives depended on them nonetheless. Their blows carried weight that had nothing to do with power levels or chakra reserves. Their blows carried hope. Sasuke and Piccolo combined their techniques in ways neither had imagined possible. Sasuke Susanoo, that skeletal guardian of vengeance, wielded a blade of pure black flame while Piccolo's arms extended around it, guiding it with Namekian precision. Together they struck at the devourer's core, carving wounds into a being that had never known what wounds felt like. Vegeta and Rock Lee, of all pairs, found themselves fighting side by side. The Prince of Saiyans, the proudest warrior of his race, moved in perfect rhythm with a young man who had once been told he would never be a shinobi. Lea's inner gates blazed brighter than the sun. Vegeta's aura roared blue, then deeper still, ascending through forms his pride had once demanded he master alone. Now he shared the sky with a boy who had earned every ounce of his strength through pain and stubbornness. And Vegeta, who never bowed to anyone, found himself glancing sideways with something dangerously close to respect. Kakashi copied technique after technique, weaving Kai into chakra in ways no one had ever imagined. Sakura's medical ninjutsu, combined with the natural resilience of the Saiyans, kept warriors on their feet who should have long since fallen. Gaara's sand encased entire fragments of the devourer, crushing them into dust that scattered across dimensions. Android 17's barriers held together sections of reality that would have otherwise imploded. Gohan and Krillin, side by side, launched a combined attack that briefly staggered the entire entity. But the devourer was not merely a beast. It was a hunger. And hunger does not tire. Sacrifices came. A shinobi fell here. A Z fighter was struck down there. Not deaths, not yet, but wounds that would take years to heal, if they ever healed at all. Rock Lee collapsed after opening the eighth gate briefly, his body smoking, his heart barely beating. Gaara stood over him, his sand forming a cradle, refusing to let him fall further. Vegeta, wounded and bleeding, roared with a fury that shook the sky itself. He would not let the boy die, not after all he had witnessed. And then, in the eye of the storm, Naruto and Goku prepared the final attack. They had been building it for hours, though hours no longer had meaning. Chakra and Kai, twisted together in a spiral that neither universe had ever seen, formed a sphere of light between their joined hands. Naruto's Sage Mode pulsed. Goku's Ultra Instinct shimmered. Behind them, the entire alliance channeled every last ounce of their remaining strength into the sphere. Sasuke's Rinnegan, Piccolo's Ancient Wisdom, Vegeta's Pride, Lee's Devotion, Gaara's Protection, Kakashi's Precision, Sakura's Love, Gohan's Hope, 17's Quiet Resolve. Every hand touched every other hand. Every soul touched every other soul. Two universes, briefly, became one. They released the attack. The sphere expanded into a beam that stretched across dimensions. It struck the devourer in the heart of its endless form, and for the first time in its incomprehensible existence, the entity screamed. The sound shattered mountains that had not yet been consumed. It fractured the fracture itself. It tore the devourer apart, layer by layer, dimension by dimension, until only silence remained. And in that silence the alliance stood, broken and bleeding and breathing, together. The battle was over. The universes had survived. The silence that followed the devourer's end was unlike any silence either universe had ever known. It was not empty. It was full of exhaustion, full of relief, full of the quiet weight of survival earned through impossible cost. The warriors stood in a clearing that had been remade 100 times over during the battle, and for a long moment none of them spoke. There were no words yet capable of carrying what they had just experienced. Slowly, reality began to stitch itself back together. The fracture in the sky, that terrible wound that had joined two worlds, began to close. It did not close violently. It did not tear things apart. It simply, gently, began to pull the universes back into their proper places, the way a healer might guide a bone back into alignment. Mountains that had merged began to separate. Stars that had blended began to return to their rightful skies. The world was remembering itself, and the warriors, one by one, began to realize what that meant. They would have to say goodbye. Naruto approached Goku slowly, and for once, the boy who never ran out of words could not find any. He simply stood in front of the man who had, in a matter of days, become one of the most important people in his life. Goku smiled at him, that same easy smile that seemed to make the weight of the world feel lighter. He told Naruto that he was one of the strongest people he had ever met, not because of his power, but because of his heart. He told Naruto that he had reminded him of something he had almost forgotten. That strength never stops growing so long as there is someone worth growing for. Naruto's eyes stung. He laughed to hide it the way he always did. He thanked Goku. He thanked him for showing him a kind of joy in battle that he had never known. A joy that came from meeting someone who loved the fight not for violence but for the beauty of pushing against limits. Goku promised him that if their worlds ever met again, he would find him. Naruto promised the same. They shook hands, and in that handshake, two universes made a quiet pact. Vegeta approached Rock Lee, who was still weak but standing, supported gently by Gaara's sand. The Prince of Saiyans looked down at the young shinobi for a long moment. He said nothing at first. Then, in a voice quieter than anyone had ever heard from him, he told Leah that he was a warrior, a true warrior. Coming from Vegeta, it was the highest praise the universe could offer. Lee cried openly. Vegeta pretended not to notice. Sasuke stood alone at the edge of the clearing, watching the sky begin to heal. Piccolo approached him without a word, and they stood in silence together. Finally, Sasuke spoke. He said that he had spent most of his life believing that power was something to be seized alone. That connection was a weakness. But he had learned in the fires of this battle that power without connection was nothing more than a shadow of itself. Piccolo nodded once. It was enough. From one former loner to another, it was more than enough. Kakashi and Gohan shared quiet words about the burden of teaching. Sakura and Krillin promised each other that they would keep growing no matter what. Android 17 simply raised a hand in farewell, and somehow it felt exactly right. The dimensional gateway shimmered into full clarity, ready to close forever. The warriors of both universes stepped back to their respective sides. They looked at one another for a final moment, memorizing faces, memorizing names, memorizing the feeling of having stood together against the impossible. Then the gateway closed. The universes separated. Life returned to what it had been before, or almost. Because nothing that has been touched by such a bond can ever truly return to what it was. Both worlds carried the memory. Both worlds carried the change. Villages that had never known Kai now whispered legends of golden-haired warriors from beyond the sky. Cities that had never known chakra now told stories of a boy with whisker marks who had saved everything. And somewhere beyond space and time, in the quiet dark between realities, faint echoes of chakra and Kai continued to resonate together, humming in perfect harmony, suggesting that one day the two universes might meet again.